In a quiet New York town, a young mechanic girl named Charlotte Carter rebuilt a veteran's car engine not for money, not for fame, but simply because it mattered. The rusted Mustang had been silent for years, holding the memories of a fallen soldier. But when Charlotte brought it back to life, she didn't just repair an engine, she restored a legacy. This emotional story of compassion, courage, and a life-changing engine repair is a true reminder that even the smallest act can bring an entire community to tears. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. The snow hadn't started yet, but you could smell it in the air, that sharp, metallic scent that only comes before a storm. It was just past 5 a.m. when the lights flicked on inside Carter's Auto and Salvage, a forgotten repair shop off Route 11 in upstate New York. Charlotte Carter, barely 17, with grease under her fingernails, and dreams too big for the rusted-out walls around her, was already underneath a '92 Bronco, tightening a bolt that didn't want to be tightened. Her hair was pulled back in a red bandana, just like her mom used to wear back before the cancer came. She didn't have to be there that early. School didn't start for 3 hours. But that shop was everything her dad had left behind when his back gave out, and the VA paperwork got lost. Again. He sat in the corner now, wrapped in an old army blanket, sipping weak coffee and pretending he wasn't watching her. "Leave that truck be, Charlie. Ain't worth your time," he said softly, voice gravelly from too many years and too many regrets. But Charlotte just smiled, the same stubborn spark in her eyes her mother had. "Not fixing the truck? Dad," she said, wiping her hands, just keeping it alive. And somehow, she was talking about more than just an engine. It started on a Sunday, the kind of cold, blue-gray afternoon that made you want to stay under blankets and forget the world. But not Charlotte. While most kids her age were scrolling their phones or nursing hangovers from bad decisions, she was elbows deep in a rusted-out Civic, trying to resurrect a dying alternator with a borrowed wrench and a prayer. Her dad, Mason, was napping in the back office, an old marine blanket pulled over his knees, the heater rattling like it might give up at any moment. His back wasn't what it used to be, and neither was he. Since the VA cut his benefits, he mostly watched from the sidelines, pretending not to notice when the shop lost another customer to a newer garage down the road. The shop phone rang once, then again. By the third ring, Charlotte kicked off her gloves and picked up Carter's Auto. A slow voice answered, gravelly, hesitant. Yeah. I was told you might work on classic engines. Something older. We've worked on everything from farm tractors to race cars, she said. What have you got? A pause. Then a '68 Mustang, belonged to my brother, was his pride, been sitting in a barn since he passed. I want to get it running for his memorial. Charlotte straightened up. That wasn't just a car call. That was something else. Bring it in, she said before she could overthink it. We'll see what we can do. 2 days later, the truck arrived. Not a delivery truck, a flatbed with a tarp-covered shell and an older man riding shotgun. The Mustang came down slow, like a body being lowered into a grave. Faded blue paint, cracked windshield, bald tires, and a look in that man's eyes like he was bracing to let go of something he wasn't ready to lose. Charlotte met him at the gate, wiping her hands on a rag. I'm Charlotte. You must be. Name's Henry, he said. Henry Dalton. His boots hit the gravel like a man who'd spent years marching on foreign soil. You could tell from the way he stood straight but tired, and the way he avoided looking directly at the car. He nodded at it. My brother, Eli, served 2 tours in Vietnam. That Mustang was his therapy. Said turning a wrench did more for his nerves than any doctor ever could. "What happened to him?" Charlotte asked gently. "Lung cancer," Henry replied. "Agent Orange took him slow." Silence settled between them. Charlotte finally broke it. "You said you wanted running for the memorial." Henry nodded. Next Sunday would have been his 70th birthday. The VFW's doing a tribute. Thought maybe I'd drive his car there. He always said he wanted to go out in gear. Charlotte looked at the calendar. 6 days. That wasn't a repair, that was a resurrection. "I'll do what I can," she said. "But she's been sitting a long time." "I know," Henry replied. "But if anyone can wake her up, they said it'd be you." Charlotte worked every night that week. She skipped meals, skipped school. Sometimes her dad would wander in, watching from the doorway with that proud but worried look only fathers have. "Why this car?" he finally asked her one night, watching her under the hood. She didn't look up. "Because he's a veteran. Dad, like you. And no one showed up for you when your truck broke down. I remember." Mason didn't say anything. He didn't need to, because Charlotte had remembered. The look on her dad's face when his old Ford died and no one would help. The way he'd stared out the window for days after, like a man who'd lost a part of himself. She remembered everything. And now, this car, this Mustang, was her chance to give something back to a man who reminded her of the man she loved most. By Thursday night, the Mustang was finally beginning to speak again. Charlotte had flushed out the gummed-up fuel lines, rebuilt half the ignition system, and swapped the spark plugs with a set her dad had kept just in case since the Bush administration. The battery had long since given up the ghost, but she found a replacement in the back covered in dust, but good enough for a test start. The first time she turned the key, it coughed like an old smoker. The second time, it caught. The engine roared awake, rough and unsteady, like a voice not used in years but alive, and Charlotte, she just stood there, staring through tears she didn't expect, hands shaking over the wheel. It wasn't just a car. Not anymore. And she couldn't wait to show Henry. He came the next morning, same wool coat, same hat in his hands. When he heard the engine fire, something changed in his posture, like a knot inside him finally loosened. "I haven't heard that sound in 10 years, he whispered. "Used to be the only thing that'd make Eli smile." Charlotte grinned. "Well, I hope it still works." She's purring now. But then it happened. Right as she stepped out of the garage to grab a new air filter, she heard it, the pop. A sharp crack from the engine bay, followed by a hiss, then silence. She rushed back inside. Smoke curled from under the hood. Henry had backed away, startled but calm. The engine was still. Too still. "Damn it," Charlotte muttered, flinging the hood open. A line had burst coolant all over the block. The fan belt had snapped. 2. Probably from the sudden heat surge. Worse still, the radiator had cracked. She could see it. Clear as day, a hairline fracture snaking through the aluminum like a death sentence. Henry said nothing, just stared. Charlotte didn't move. She couldn't. Her shoulders slumped as the realization hit there wasn't enough time. Not to order a new radiator. Not to replace the belt and reseal the housing. Not with 2 days left before the memorial. She kicked the nearest toolbox hard enough to leave a dent. "I'm sorry," she said. "Finally, I really thought I had it." Henry looked at her. And for the first time, she saw the full weight of his years, not just his age, but the war, the loss, the quiet heartbreak of outliving everyone you loved. He didn't speak for a long time. Then, finally, "You did more than anyone else ever tried. That counts." But she shook her head. "No, it's not enough. Not if I can't get him there." Henry's voice dropped low. He's not in the car. Charlotte. He's in here. He tapped his chest. And here? He motioned to the shop. She wiped her face with the back of her sleeve, trying to steady herself. That night, long after Henry had gone, Charlotte sat on the shop floor next to the Mustang, eyes red, hands in her lap. Her dad walked in, holding 2 mugs of lukewarm cocoa. "You gonna let this beat you?" he asked. Charlotte didn't answer. Until, "Not if I have another radiator." Mason blinked. "You planning on robbing a junkyard tonight?" She stood up slowly. "No, I'm planning on calling in the only favor I've ever asked from anyone in this town." By dawn, Charlotte was pulling into Richie's auto salvage 3 towns over. The place was a graveyard of old metal. But Richie, an old drag racer who owed Mason his knees and his life, had what she needed. By 4 p.m, she was back at the shop, knuckles bruised, hair matted, adrenaline keeping her upright. The new radiator went in like it belonged there. The belt she crafted one herself, using parts from 2 mismatched sizes. At 6:47 p.m, the Mustang turned over smoother than before, stronger, alive again. The Mustang wasn't just running now, it was breathing slow, steady, purposeful, like it had been waiting all these years for someone to believe in it again. When Henry returned Saturday morning, Charlotte was polishing the chrome trim with an old flannel shirt. The air smelled like motor oil and orange hand cleaner, and the winter sun spilled across the floor like a quiet blessing. "She's ready," Charlotte said, not even turning around. Henry didn't respond at first. He just stood there, hand trembling slightly as he reached out to touch the fender. For a moment, he looked afraid, like if he blinked, it might all disappear. "How did you—" he began, voice raw. Charlotte shrugged. "Got lucky, and Richie owed my dad a favor." Henry chuckled, dry and quiet. "I thought that man was dead." "Almost," she said with a smirk. But he had one good radiator left in him. They stood there for a moment, just looking. Not at the car, but at what it represented. "It's not just the Mustang, is it?" Charlotte asked softly. Henry nodded slowly. "No, it's him." And then, like a dam cracking just enough to let a little water through, he began to speak. "I was 24 when Eli came back the first time," Henry said, had this look in his eyes like he never fully returned, said the war changed how he saw the world, how he saw people. Charlotte listened silently, her hands resting on the hood as if steadying something bigger than steel. He never talked much about it, just worked on that car, every Saturday. Didn't matter the weather, said it gave him something he could fix, something that didn't scream at night or cry when the wind blew. Henry's eyes shimmered now, the way old glass does in sunlight. After he passed, I thought maybe it was better to just let it all rust away. The car, the grief, the guilt of still being here when he wasn't. Charlotte looked at him, her voice quiet. "But you didn't. You brought it here." He nodded. "I didn't know why at first. I thought maybe it was just to honor him. But now, I think I was hoping someone else could carry part of it. Someone like you." Charlotte swallowed hard. No one had ever told her something like that before, that her work, her hands, could help heal something so heavy. And that's when she realized maybe this was her calling. Not just fixing engines, but restoring stories. Giving people back something they thought they'd lost forever. Later that afternoon, Henry climbed behind the wheel for the first time in over a decade. The seat creaked under his weight. The leather was cracked, the radio didn't work, and the heater barely coughed. But when he turned the key, the engine purred like a promise. Charlotte stood by the passenger door, arms folded, pretending not to hold her breath. Henry revved the engine gently. Then again, and finally. He looked over at her and said, "You coming with me tomorrow?" Charlotte blinked. "To the memorial. You rebuilt this car. You gave me back something I thought I lost. Feels only right you should be there when we say goodbye." She hesitated. I've never been to a military service." Henry smiled, soft and sad. "It's not about the uniforms. It's about remembering someone who mattered. And you, Charlotte. You made sure my brother mattered, even after he was gone." She nodded slowly. "Then yeah, I'll be there." As Henry drove off, taillights disappearing into the gold-tinted snowlight. Charlotte stood in the doorway of the shop, hands in her pockets, eyes following the Mustang until it turned the corner. In that moment, she didn't just feel like a mechanic. She felt like someone who'd brought a piece of someone back to life. The memorial was held in the VFW hall just outside of town, a squat brick building with peeling paint, more memories than maintenance. Snow dusted the roof, and a slow wind carried the faint hum of a bugle from the sound check inside. Charlotte stood beside the Mustang in the gravel lot, her hands shoved into the pockets of her father's old army jacket. The car looked pristine under the gray sky, freshly washed, chrome gleaming, hood ornament catching the light like a salute. Henry emerged from the hall in his pressed marine dress blues, a silver cane in one hand, a folded flag under the other. When he saw the car, he stopped walking. He just stood there. "Looks like she's ready," he said quietly. "She is," Charlotte answered. "And so are you." Henry nodded once. Then slowly, gently. He placed the folded flag on the passenger seat and climbed behind the wheel. Inside the hall, the air was thick with reverence. Photos of Eli lined the table, young and smiling in one, older and tired in another. There were medals too, letters, even a faded newspaper clipping about the Mustang, back when Eli and Henry rebuilt it together in 1983. Two brothers, one car, a bond forged in grease and steel. Charlotte stood at the back, unnoticed until Henry stepped up to the microphone. His voice cracked on the first sentence. "I didn't know if I was going to say anything today. Truth is, I haven't said much about Eli in years. Kept it all locked away in a garage that collected more dust than memories." He paused, eyes scanning the crowd. "But a girl just 17 reminded me this week that broken things can still run, that rust can be cleaned, that engines and hearts can come back to life." Henry looked over at Charlotte then. She froze, caught in the light. "I brought Eli's car back today, but I didn't do it alone. A girl with oil on her hands and fire in her chest gave me a piece of my brother back, and I'll never be able to repay her." You could hear the sniffles ripple through the room like a quiet wave. And then, just as Henry stepped down, an older man in a wheelchair rolled forward. He wore an army hat with 3 stars pinned crookedly. His voice was raspy. "Is this the girl who fixed Eli's Mustang?" Charlotte nodded. The man motioned her closer. "I served with him." He said, "Vietnam? 71. He used to talk about that damn car like it was his second pair of lungs. Always said he wanted to pass it down." Charlotte smiled politely. "Well, I think it's finally found its purpose." But the old man shook his head. No. He meant pass it down for real, to someone who'd understand it, who'd keep it alive, who'd need it. And then, from his jacket pocket, he pulled out a weathered envelope. "Eli left this with me after his last hospital visit. Told me to give it to the one who brought the car back, if that day ever came." Charlotte took the envelope slowly, her hands trembling. Inside was a handwritten letter, shaky, but strong. "If you're reading this, you've brought her back. And if you brought her back, then maybe you're the kind of person who still believes in second chances. I never had kids, but I always wanted someone to drive her again, Someone who'd understand the difference between a machine and a soul. This car is yours now. She's already chosen you. Leifwam. Charlotte couldn't hold it in anymore. The tears came fast, and no one looked away. Not Henry, not the veterans, not the strangers, because everyone in that room had lost something: a brother, a war buddy, a part of themselves, and for one rare, perfect moment, they all got a piece of it back. Later, as the crowd began to thin, Henry approached Charlotte in the quiet of the hallway. You gave him a voice again. He said, "Now maybe it's time you found yours." Charlotte looked down at the keys now resting in her palm, heavy with meaning. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now," she whispered. Henry placed a hand on her shoulder. "Drive." For days after the memorial, Charlotte didn't drive the Mustang? Not because she didn't want to, but because she understood what it meant now. It wasn't just an engine and a shell. It was a story, a legacy, a final wish from a man who never got to pass it down while he was alive. So she left it parked beneath the old oak tree behind the shop, covered in a tarp, as the February winds blew in and out like memories. She still worked the garage with her dad, still pulled double shifts on weekends, but something inside her had changed. She found herself listening more to the hum of engines, to the silence between customers, to the way her dad's voice got quieter when he talked about his own years in uniform. She started asking about things she never dared before, like what it felt like to come home to nothing, what it felt like to be forgotten. And Mason, who had carried his own silence for too long, finally began to talk. They'd sit in the shop late at night, coffee gone cold, grease still on their hands, and they'd just talk about war, about loss, about how sometimes the hardest part isn't surviving, it's learning how to live after. It was in those moments that Charlotte began to understand healing didn't come in sudden bursts. It came slowly, like oil warming in the lines, like breath returning to a stalled engine. 2 weeks after the memorial, a man pulled up to the shop in a battered Toyota. His son sat in the passenger seat, no older than 12, staring wide-eyed at the rows of cars out front. "We heard about the girl mechanic on the radio," the man said. "Said she brought a soldier's car back from the dead. My boy wants to learn how to fix things." Thought maybe you'd let him watch. Charlotte glanced at her dad. Mason smiled and gave the tiniest nod. She wiped her hands and crouched next to the boy. "What's your name?" "Liam," he mumbled. "You ever hold a wrench before, Liam?" He shook his head. "Well," she said, grabbing one and placing it in his small hands, "there's a first time for everything." And just like that, the seed was planted. It didn't happen all at once. But over the next few months, word spread that Carter's Auto wasn't just a dusty old shop. It was a place where broken things came back. Not just cars, people. Veterans started stopping by, some just to talk, some to listen, some to lend a hand. Teens from the local high school asked if Charlotte could show them how to do an oil change, or what a timing belt looked like. One girl even brought in her grandfather's tractor and said, "I want to fix this the way you fixed that Mustang." Charlotte started teaching, not officially, not with lesson plans or whiteboards, but with patience, with care, with the kind of knowledge that came from heartache and grit and grease under your nails. And the Mustang. It didn't stay under that tarp for long. She started taking it out once a week not far, just enough to stretch its legs. Sometimes she'd park it outside the shop like a beacon. Sometimes she'd drive to the bluff just past Route 12, where the wind made the tall grass dance like it was remembering a time before grief. One night, she came back from the bluff and found her dad waiting with a letter in his hands. "What's that?" she asked. "It's from the state college," he said. "They're offering a scholarship, vocational education, Engineering with an automotive focus. They heard about what you did, and they want you to come teach part-time. Charlotte blinked. I'm 17. Mason grinned. Apparently, 17's old enough when you've brought a war hero's car back to life. She stood there, stunned, not just by the opportunity, but by the truth of what it meant she wasn't invisible anymore. She had a voice, a purpose, a legacy. She walked over to the Mustang, ran her hand along the side panel, and whispered, "Thank you, Eli." And for the first time in her life, she saw her future, not as a kid with a wrench, but as someone who could change lives one engine, one soul, at a time. It was a Saturday morning in early spring, one of those rare days when the wind feels like it's exhaling, and the sun lands soft on your shoulders like an old friend. Charlotte stood in front of Carter's auto with her sleeves rolled up and a wrench in her hand. But this time, she wasn't fixing anything. She was teaching. Around her were 5 teenagers, 2 boys, 3 girls wide-eyed and eager, scribbling notes, some with oil on their cheeks like war paint. Among them was Liam, the boy who'd shown up months earlier with his dad, now proudly balancing a socket set and explaining torque ratios like he'd been born in the Bay. On the wall behind them hung a new sign, "The Veterans Garage Restoring More Than Engines." Below it, in smaller letters, it read, "In honor of Eli Dalton, a life remembered, a life continued." And inside the garage, tucked beneath a canvas cover with red stitching, sat the Mustang, waiting for its next drive. Never a relic, always a reminder. That afternoon, as the class wrapped up, Charlotte wiped her hands and leaned against the Mustang, watching as the teens trickled out, all talking over each other, already making plans to come back. Mason walked up beside her, coffee in one hand, a proud sparkle in his eyes. "You know," he said, "I thought I was going to be the one to rebuild this place." Charlotte smiled. "You did. You just didn't know you were doing it." He looked at her, a bit choked up. "Your mama would have been proud." Charlotte swallowed the lump in her throat. "She is. I feel her every time I turn a wrench." They stood in silence for a beat, not the awkward kind, but the kind that only comes when 2 people understand something without needing to say it. Then came the sound of gravel crunching. An old pickup truck pulled up, and out stepped a woman with silver hair and a military pin on her coat. She looked around, hesitant. "You must be Charlotte," she said. "I'm Margaret. Eli was my cousin." Charlotte straightened. "It's an honor to meet you, ma'am." Margaret walked slowly to the Mustang, running her fingers across the hood like tracing the past. "I heard what you did," she said softly. "You didn't just fix a car. You brought him home." Charlotte blinked fast, fighting tears. "He brought me somewhere too, gave me purpose, gave me direction." Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out a small wooden box. He wanted this passed down too. Said it belonged to the soul who gave the car its second heartbeat. Inside the box was Eli's dog tag, scratched, worn, but still intact. Charlotte held it like something sacred, like the weight of legacy itself. "Thank you," she whispered. Margaret smiled. "No, honey, thank you. For proving that sometimes. The best mechanics aren't the ones who know the most, but the ones who care the deepest." That night, Charlotte took the Mustang out one more time. She didn't drive fast. She didn't crank the radio. She just let the road take her where it wanted past the hills, through the quiet, into the kind of night that makes you believe again. And when she reached the bluff, the same spot she'd visited alone so many times before she parked the car, climbed onto the hood, and looked up at the stars. Eli was somewhere out there. Her mom, too. and all the others who never got a second chance. But she was still here, and she wasn't going to waste hers. Not now. Not ever. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories aren't told in books or speeches. They're told through a girl with a wrench, an old car with a soul, and the belief that even the most broken things can run again. Sometimes, it takes something broken to help us heal. The Mustang was more than a car. It was a symbol of loss, memory, resilience, and love, and Charlotte. She wasn't just a girl with a wrench. She was a reminder that compassion has power, that when we dare to listen, to care, and to take time for what others have left behind, we become part of a story far bigger than ourselves. This story teaches us that legacy isn't about what we leave behind. It's about who we lift up while we're here. A war veteran's silence, a teenager's hands, a dying engine. Each of them had something left to give. And together, they created something beautiful. In a world moving too fast, full of noise and neglect, the greatest act of rebellion may simply be to stop, to remember, and to restore. Not just machines, but hearts and hope. Because for Charlotte and for everyone she'd go on to teach, it was never about the car. It was always about the drive. The end. Up next, 2 more stories that will restore your faith in people. Click to keep watching and hit subscribe if you believe broken things deserve second chances.